Greetings. It's an honor to be here. I would like to dedicate this talk to my good friend Christian and Claudia. They've made a tremendous effort to put this conference together. So thank you, Christian and Claudia. I've also had quite a number of experiences with Amanita muscaria as well as Pantherina, and at later times I definitely want to talk to Ralph and other people about that. But this talk is going to center on the psilocybin active species. And because there are literally over 200 species that have been described in the genus Psilocybe to date, of which we now know over 100 of them are psilocybin active, I can't possibly show all the species that I would love to show you in the course of 45 minutes. I will try to speak slowly. It is not my nature, nor was it Jonathan's nature, but he did a very good job at slowing down. So I'm going to progress immediately to the first slides. If we could have the lights down. This is a photograph that was given to me by Peter First, and it's pottery from southern Mexico that is approximately 500 years AD, and I think it symbolizes what we're all about. We're at a gathering celebrating the beauty and wonderment of mushrooms, as well as other plants. And I think that these gatherings have progressed through millennia because of our common interest. Now, to give you some description, this photograph has never been shown in public. This is me when I was 19 years of age. And this is my first attempt at growing Psilocybe cubensis. And there's my pressure cooker there. And you can imagine the response that I got from very straight mycologists when I would walk into their laboratories at universities and say, I'm interested in mushrooms. You know, they would immediately stereotype me as to my particular interest, and they were quite right. But the psilocybin mushrooms have been my gateway into a larger arena of mushroom species, some of which I know now deeply will have a pivotal impact on helping us survive into the next millennium. There is a quote, and I don't know who first said it. I wish I did. But it says, "The greatest achievement of science this century, the acknowledgement of our ignorance." And I feel that very deeply. I come before you, and I want to be very clear, I know almost nothing about mushrooms. The more I study them, the more I realize the depth of knowledge that is soon or yet to be discovered. And this is also true. It takes many minds and many people's experiences to bring knowledge together. And I think we've tapped into a body of knowledge heretofore unexplored, even to as minutest level. And I think we're entering into a new age of awareness that is a whole new frontier with fantastic possibilities. So in 1976, and I see this conference as a continuation of that, Jonathan Ott and a number of other individuals started the first conference on psychoactive mushrooms. And it was held in Washington State at a place called Miller-Sylvania State Park. Directly after that conference, myself and Dr. Gaston Guzman, Gary Menser, now deceased, Stephen Pollack, also now deceased, and Stephen was one who first described Psilocybe tamponensis. Myself and Dale Leslie went on a wild mushroom gathering experience that lasted well over 2 weeks. And we were gathering specimens for Dr. Gaston Guzman's monograph on the genus Psilocybe, and he is the world's expert on that genus. And in the course of those travels, literally every time that we stopped the car and opened the doors, we were finding Psilocybes everywhere. It wasn't like we were going after Psilocybes were coming to us. And I see that again and again, those of you who have been mushroomed, we are selected, I feel, by the mushrooms. We become communicators or vehicles of knowledge. We don't own this information, and I don't think that any of the speakers pretend that we even have any copyright to that knowledge. The mushrooms come to us. They impassion us. They excite us, and through that excitement and research, etc., we recommunicate larger and greater ideas than our own minds can create. So, my partner and I, Dusty, we live a few miles from here. We live at the base of the Olympic Peninsula, of of Washington State, which is in the far west coast region of North America. And we do a lot of this. Dusty is an incredible hiker, and oftentimes I'm trailing, 50 to 100 feet behind her, trying to catch up. And we go into the old growth forest in search of new taxa, in search of new mushroom species. And we see that the old growth forests are one of the few places left on the planet where the fungal genome is relatively undisturbed. And the ecological niches that are shrinking because of overpopulation, pollution, et cetera, we're losing an enormous number of potential candidates that have significant medicinal properties, as well as those that are psilocybin active. So this is where we live. We live right here in this facility. We have a 17-acre farm, and this is on Skookum Inlet, and it's at the very southern reaches of the Puget Sound. And this is our research facility, and it's 17 acres, 400 feet of waterfront, and we have two state-of-the-art laboratories in vitro, wherein we do in vitro propagation. We have 3 growing rooms where we test different strains, etc. Now, in 1980, I started a business called Fungi Perfecti, and my business today, I'm sure, would be very affluent. I'd be a very wealthy person had I chosen to sell spore prints of psilocybin mushrooms. I chose not to. The situation in the United States is quite different than here. And the authorities there watch very carefully to see if you are involved in selling, for instance, spores and then selling equipment for the cultivation of those into what the United States considers an illegal substance. Many businesses in the United States, unfortunately, have been busted by the DEA, etc. Specifically, Tom Alexander, who was the editor and founder of Sinsemia Tips. He is a classic example. And so we chose not to sell psilocybin spore prints. And in the United States, I am self-censored. No one's told me to be quiet about the subject. Books are protected by our Constitution. We have so-called freedom of speech, but it's looked upon very critically when it comes to drugs. And since the psilocybin active mushrooms are considered, drug-producing organisms, we have to be very careful. Now, it may well be that I could have gotten away with that, and I would be a wealthy person today. But it was far better for me to continue on my path and to write books and let others do that, because I'm in this for life, and I can't do what I do best behind prison bars. So I chose to direct myself very carefully. And so there's people who have dealt with this. I apologize to you right now if you've asked us questions about psilocybin mushrooms over the internet, etc., and you've gotten this reply. I'm sorry, we do not discuss the cultivation of psilocybin mushrooms. Now, don't be offended, because all the information is in my books. And should you want information on the cultivation of psilocybe cyanescens on wood chips outdoors, there are not only chapters of that in my books, but there's also other species that are edible and gourmet mushrooms, and the techniques are virtually the same. All you do is substitute one species for that description or technique, and you can quickly come to the same conclusion. So. Probably the most significant psilocybin active mushroom of this century is Psilocybe cubensis. This photograph was taken outside of Palenque in Mexico, and this single mushroom, as most all of us are aware of, can easily be cultivated and is extremely popular. The cool thing about this whole field is that we can collect spore prints, we can put them on paper, we can put them into envelopes, and we can mail them all over the world. And it's a very convenient and easy way to spread spore mass and progeny. All of you here, whether you know it or not, are psilocybin mushroom cultivators by the mere fact that you're in this room with each other. We are all spreading spore mass on our clothes, on our hats, etc. And by going back to our respective homes, the mushrooms are using us as vehicles for spreading their spores. And I don't think this is necessarily happenstance. I think there's a grand design in this whole scheme, as I'll show. And a very fun thing to do, and I hope many of you come to Palenque. We kind of started this tradition 2 years ago. Is there's lots of Psilocybe cubensis growing in the fields there, and so before everybody departs, we encourage them to take spore prints on their hats, spore prints on their clothing, and then when you go through customs and you get onto airplanes, even though you may be beside extremely conservative neo-fascist Christian types, you can enlist their support for spreading spores around the world. So how I fell into this, now it's a very peculiar coincidence. I met Jonathan Ott just as he was leaving the Evergreen State College. I like to call the Evergreen State College the psilocybin State College. In 1975, 1976, I went there, and Jonathan was just going on to study with Dr. Gaston Guzman in Mexico. By coincidence, we ended up in the same laboratory complex with basically some of the same people. And from Jonathan's initial interest in psilocybin mushrooms, Dr. Michael Bugh got a DEA license, a Drug Enforcement Administration license, which then covered my work and that of Jeremy Bigwoods. And then between the four of us, we went on to publish maybe a dozen papers on the pharmacology or taxonomy of psilocybin active mushrooms. So my specialty was scanning electron microscopy. I was a lab rat. I spent hundreds, thousands of hours in front of the scanning electron microscope, primarily looking at psilocybin mushrooms. So I'm going to show you some of those micrographs, which were then included in Dr. Gaston Guzman's monograph and used to delineate different species in the genus Psilocybe. So this is a spore of Psilocybe baeocystis. Most of the spores in the genus Psilocybe tend to be ellipsoid and smooth, and they typically have a germ pore right here, and this is the site of where it all begins. This is where spore germination starts. And then coincident with the germination of spores is the competition with bacteria. And it's from that dualistic situation between bacteria and fungi that we've gained most of our notable antibiotics. And so I want to try to impress upon you that psilocybin mushrooms are not just magic in the sense that they can have these effects, but I think they are instrumental in creating an ecology of consciousness. And I believe that in the 1960s and 1970s and going on to today, the ecology movement is largely driven by a keen sense and a keen benefit of knowledge gained through psilocybin mushrooms. And I think many people here share in that, is that when you eat large doses of these mushrooms, you're impressed by many different things, but there's a kind of a call to arms. There's a calling out from nature that the earth is in trouble, that these are the guardians of the planet, and it's our turn, to accept this responsibility and to try to repair the harm and to preserve the ecosystems of this planet before it's too late. So I don't think it is a hedonistic, egocentric experience. I think it's a global experience, and I don't think it's just by coincidence. I think there is an ultimate design behind all of this. So spores germinate, and here we have one spore of Psilocybe pelliculosa that is germinating. And then very quickly, as one spore germinates, adjacent spores are stimulated into germination. So there is a kind of a domino effect where there's an increasing number of spores that are germinating as time goes on. And then very quickly a mycelial network is created, a web. And this mycelial network you can see here, and there are spores underneath. In fact, this is a spore print that I added water to, and the spores germinated. And then this overlaying mycelial network covered the spore print. Now, very quickly, this mycelial network extends, and it's exquisitely well designed. It's a mosaic of cells, and I believe it is Earth's natural internet. There are mosaics of interfacing mycelial networks upon one another over every landmass on this planet. If you were to take a cubic inch of soil or sawdust that is well permeated with mushroom mycelium, and you were to stretch the cells end on end, there can be more than a mile or 2/3 of a kilometer of hyphal cells stretched end upon end. So in this much soil, there can be almost a kilometer of mushroom mycelium stretched end on end. There is no site-specific orifice for the digestion of nutrients. The entire surface area is a membrane for the release of enzymes and acids which break down plant material. It is the entire foundation of our ecosystem. Without fungi, all the plants would quickly die because there would be a lack of nutrients. It's the recycling of dead plant material and other organic complexes back into the ecosystem that is made possible by the mushroom mycelium. I believe this mycelial network is a neural network for the Gaian consciousness. I believe we all are partaking and taking steps through different doors, coming to the same realization that we aren't separate from this planet. We are of this planet. We are a community. You know, our minds may think that we are humans and those are animals and those are plants, but I think many of us have come to realize that we're all part of a one. And the mushroom mycelium is the natural neural net that is sentient. And I do not exaggerate. I believe that mushroom mycelium has a consciousness. It is sentient. When something happens in the ecosystem, especially a catastrophe, it is the mycelial networks that sense this and then design responses for quickly capturing nutrients that are locked up in dead organic plant material, wood, etc., and then colonize it and then recycle it back into the ecosphere. And I think that all of us, you know, whether we are willing or knowing or unknowing participants in this process, I think as time goes on, the importance of our being aware of these processes becomes paramount. So here's an example of Psilocybe azurescens, which is one of my favorite species right now, that is tenaciously holding together wood chips of alder. And this is what I seek as a cultivator to do, is to create a mycelial tenacity, a mycelial platform that is dense enough that you can then, this platform can explode into mushrooms or be used as spawn. And I have another book that I'm working on that should be out in the next year, which is a totally non-technical book about how to use transplantation techniques for moving mushroom mycelium from one place to another. And you can create a perennial psilocybin mushroom bed outdoors in your backyard. It's very, very easily done. So when we take things into culture, and this is from a spore germination, and this is Gymnopolis luteofolius, a very not well-known psilocybin active species that grows in parts of Europe here as well as northwestern North America. And what I look for as a cultivator is the general efficiency of a relatively thin mycelial mat producing a relatively large three-dimensional fruit body. And biological efficiencies of being able to adapt to substrates and producing mushrooms is one of the key ways of measuring edible mushroom production throughout the world. But we're in Amsterdam, so I can talk about this. So on the gills, there are these cells called basidia, and the basidia quickly enlarge, and then they ultimately give rise to more spores. So these are two young basidia, and they then go from this stage to the stage that you saw earlier to this stage, and these are four sterigmata, and from these four haploid spores will be produced. Now, for those of you who are kind of biologists, and this karyogamy occurs here, then meiosis, and then those four haploid spore packets migrate. And then you get a fully mature basidium. In this case, this is Pinus phonosecii. And these spores, as a beautiful symbolism of life on this planet, come off in pairs, and they are juxtapositioned. There was an article recently published to try to explain how these spores, which are only 9 to 12 microns in length, are thrown anywhere from 8 to 20 inches away from the mushrooms. And they're now called ballista spores because it is now known that a little gas bubble forms here, and there's a sugar coating that forms on the outside of the spores. And because of electrostatic field differentials, the spores are thrown out with a force of 25,000 Gs. That's 10,000 more Gs necessary for this. 10,000 more Gs more than that which is necessary for the space shuttle astronauts to escape the gravitational pull of the Earth. So absolutely phenomenal. Okay, so going back now approximately 7,000 years in northern Algeria, at the Tisili Enajar Plateau, which roughly translates as the plateau of running rivers, thousands of cave art drawings were discovered in a labyrinthine complex of caves. And several dozen of these were found in 1947 by a French anthropologist named Lot and his Japanese photographer partner. And amazingly, if you can believe it, anthropologists for 30 or 40 years could not figure out what the intent of the artist was. This is why, the acknowledgement of the greatest achievement of science of the century, the acknowledgement of our ignorance. I guess so. This is this may well be the mushroom that was being enjoyed at the time. Of course, now because of the Sahara Desert, it is a very dry region. But Gary Linkoff went there a few years ago and found pinaster. And this psilocybe mushroom coming out of it, and which we believe is Psilocybe maryi. And here's another example of it. So what I want to go through is showing you several examples of different psilocybin active species and how to identify them. I'm not going to get heavy into taxonomy because there's not enough time, but I want to kind of survey the psilocybin mushroom map, so to speak, and point out some key species. In this another example from the western slope of Guatemala, where mushroom stones have been collected and unearthed over the past 100, 200 years. And it is thought that the mushroom stones were perhaps property boundaries, perhaps were family heirlooms, which signified family lineage, were passed down from one family to another over generations. But nevertheless, they were spiritually thought to be very, very potent. And these mushroom stones number now about 400 or 500 have been presently discovered. And there's a great iconography of the development of mushroom stones that the Japanese Tobacco Institute published a super book showing the delineation and evolution of different forms of mushroom stones at the encouragement of a woman nun by the name of Yvonne Summercamp, and she is now the head of a nunnery in Guatemala, and is a person that I highly recommend that people network with. So in 1957, May 13th, it really came to the attention of Americans when millions of copies of Life magazine were delivered to their homes. Now, this is in the middle of the Cold War, and in this was the first description of the use of mushrooms as visionary medicines, and featured Maria Sabina, and was written by R. Gordon Wasson, who is featured here. And even though that the village was disguised, thousands and tens of thousands of Americans began their trek into Mexico seeking the magic mushrooms. So amazingly, in Life magazine was a botanically very accurate field guide on how to identify Psilocybe cubensis, Psilocybe cerulescens, Psilocybe zapotecorum, on and on. So, I mean, this is just amazing because it's a super conservative time, and this magazine ends up, on the doorsteps of millions of Americans. Now, in the academic circles, this caused an uproar. And the intelligentsia of that time then really picked up the ball. And professors at the University of California at Berkeley, at Harvard, Cornell, Yale, lots of people started going down to Mexico to look for magic mushrooms. And then in the mid-1970s, a number of books came out that reflected the interest in these mushrooms, particularly on the west coast of North America. Jonathan's book was the first book really to come out that had decent descriptions and accurate taxonomic information. Terence McKenna and Dennis McKenna's book, and they wrote under this pseudonym Austin Eric, Psilocybin Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide, was the single most tour de force cultivation manual that caused or helped create this revolution of cultivating Psilocybe cubensis in closets. I call it the Psilocybe cubensis Scholarship Fund. And I know many, many people who finance their tuitions through colleges by growing Psilocybe cubensis in their closets. They owe a debt to Psilocybe cubensis for their education. And then there's a number of other books, Growing Wild Mushrooms. This is on the second International Conference on Psychoactive Mushrooms. And then of all books to come out, it was one of the strangest books is The Golden Guide to Hallucinogenic Plants. Go figure. I mean, I don't know how the Golden Guide series is marketed to children, if you don't know this. And so how this book ever got past the editors and got published is still a mystery to me. Then Stephen Pollack produced this book, and this is my first book that was published in 1976. And then this led to a lot of people going to Mexico to look for the magic mushrooms. And this is Manuel Torres. And these are relatively small specimens, but perfectly adequate for spore prints of Psilocybe cubensis. And then the revolution in growing magic mushrooms at home began. And Psilocybe cubensis cultivation in the United States primarily started as in jars. The huge amounts of Mason and Kerr canning jars were being ordered, by the 100 case load directly from the factories. I'm sure that these two companies did not mind. And Psilocybe cubensis could be grown in a variety of ways. One of the more popular ways now in North America is in the months of July, August, and September, what we call leached cow manure, which is when they use separators to separate the roughage from the urea, and they spray back the urea slurry back onto the fields. They create these huge piles of roughage material. And many keen cultivators have discovered that these piles heat up naturally by themselves. They self-pasteurize. You can dig into these piles and bring them out. It's already ready-made compost. You add spawn to it, and then people go. This is outdoor cultivation with hoops and black plastic, or what we call remake cloth, which is a kind of a bug-out cloth. And you can do outdoor or bed cultivation and grow literally hundreds and hundreds of pounds outdoors, kind of semi-naturally. The advantage of this is you have entropy as an ally. Should you have insects coming in, they go away, and there's natural predators out there to the insects. So this is one of the more favored ways, and really not discussed by anybody in any book, that is the simplest way to, in a sense, fly under cover of the U.S. government, because the growing cycle is very short, it's outdoors, it doesn't kind of meet the description of a laboratory, underground drug laboratory. It's more in the garden environment, in amongst the vegetables, etc. So it's a very, very simple way of growing massive amounts of Psilocybe cubensis in a very, very short time. And you can grow it also on pasteurized wheat straw, as is shown here. More Psilocybe cubensis. When you're getting over about 4 pounds per square foot, or 2 kilograms, I don't know what it converts to in square meters, around 2 to 5 pounds per square foot of Psilocybe cubensis fresh weight. That's pretty much the average good yield. And when you're a master cultivator, you're getting 7 pounds per square foot, which is fresh weight. So that's almost 3/4 of a pound dry weight. Very significant. It's a beautiful mushroom. Many of you here have grown it and fallen in love with it. It is a majestic mushroom. And when the partial veil begins to tear, the first partial veil, that is a holy ceremony for many of us cultivators. Because as the first mushrooms develop and the first veil tears, you can watch it tear in about half an hour to an hour. and it's a joyous moment, and it's one that should always be celebrated. For those of you who are cultivators, I encourage you to pick up that ritual. So, and then there was a plethora of other books that came out. This is the Leonard Enos book, which was really, it was the first book, and I give him credit for that, but it was a terrible book. It was largely a rip-off of other people's work and had a lot of misinformation in it. But there was also some other books that were not very good. This is probably the next to the worst book ever published on mushrooms. And then this book here says that, you can use metol, which is a photographic reagent, and it stains mushrooms blue, then the mushrooms are psilocybin active. That's patently false. So there was a lot of misinformation that was being published. And then, in the course of the past 20 years, I've produced these books. This is my first field guide. This book now sold over 100,000 copies, and still sells more each year, which is like totally surprising to me because it came out in 1983. And this is the book that I'm very proud of, and this is 600 pages long, and it's mostly on the cultivation of gourmet and medicinal mushrooms. There is a section on the cultivation of psilocybe mushrooms outdoors in that book as well. And then my more recent book, this one here, which literally sat in a drawer. Many of you have started big projects. Anybody who has written a book here knows, especially Christian's last book, that's a clear example, nearly killed him writing it. That's no exaggeration. Because when you get involved in these projects, if you conceive the enormity of the entire project all at once, you'd never start it. But there's something about this subject, and these mushrooms inspire us, and these plants inspire us, that give us the courage and the strength and the stamina to go on. So any of you who have built a house, who have done other books, my sympathy and empathy is with you, because it's a very lonesome project. No one really is there to do it but yourself. But it's the same thing as building a house in my mind. So the number of mushrooms that more of the prominent species that I want to cover. This is a photograph by Jim Jacobs. This is Psilocybe mexicana, known as Teonenacatl, or God's flesh. This is one of the mushrooms that was revered by Mesoamericans for centuries prior to the invasion of the Spaniards, who brought cattle with them. And the Psilocybe cubensis is associated with the Spanish invasion. So Psilocybe cubensis traditionally, in the past 50 years, have been given to tourists. And Psilocybe mexicana and these other mushrooms are revered and used for private religious ceremonies by native peoples. So Psilocybe mexicana is what I call the liberty cap of Mesoamerica. It looks very, very similar to Psilocybe semelanciata. And Psilocybe mexicana can easily be grown. It produces sclerotia, which can be harvested, and they're like potato-like structures, and then you can bury them in soil, and then mushrooms come up. And this is one of the sweetest and dearest mushrooms that I've grown, because to me, it's like God touched the top of every mushroom, and it's like a sunburst. And I feel a strong affection for the species. Psilocybe tamponensis, we were at one of the coffee shops and they had fresh sclerotia, Psilocybe tamponensis, right beside sushi. Where else in the world can you get sushi and Psilocybe tamponensis sclerotia side by side? But in Amsterdam, I love this city. And it is very similar in appearance to the temperate relative Psilocybe semelanciata, which you have here in Holland. And Psilocybe semelanciata is a very safe mushroom to pick. It tends to grow exclusively in pasture lands, and there's very few poisonous species that are like it. It is a mushroom which does not bruise bluish very readily, in fact, quite rarely, but it has some other features that are uniquely specific to it. It has a separable gelatinous pellicle and an acute umbo, and I'll show those in just a second. And species that I have been blessed in that I've published now 4 novel species in the genus Psilocybe in scientific journals in Latin. And this is my answer to Psilocybe liniformis variety liniformis here in Holland. We have a variety called Psilocybe liniformis variety americana, which I published with Dr. Gaston Guzman in 1981. Psilocybe liniformis here in Europe has an edge that you can peel off with a pin. That's why it's called liniformis. It's got a white fringe that you can peel off the gill. And that is specific to that mushroom, and there's no other species that I know of that is similar to it. So this is one of the first species that I published. And then a species that was surrounded by a lot of taxonomic debate is one that was recently clarified, and we know this one as Psilocybe strictipes or strictipes. And this grows particularly in Oregon, where there's an enormous industry in growing grass seed for lawns and golf courses, etc. And there's no manure, and as a result, there's no cows and there's no fences. So it's a great place to go mushroom hunting because you can stop the car, and literally there's about a 20 to 30 mile band of farmland, so to speak, and about 100, 200 miles long where they grow the majority of grass seed for all the users in North America and elsewhere. This is fantastic too because in this photograph here, there's no exaggeration. There's probably several million mushrooms, which means all the spore mass is going into the soil. So as the seeds are being harvested later on, then that spore mass is being spread to golf courses, government buildings, yards. I mean, it truly is an invisible revolution. And Psilocybe strictipes looks very similar to Psilocybe semilanceata. I don't have time to get into all the nuances, so I need to jump ahead here. But many of these temperate psilocybin active mushroom species in the genus Psilocybe have a cap, which means that the cap is really, when it's wet, it's real dark, but then as it dries, it fades to yellow. So that is one of the key features in the temperate psilocybin active species. It also has many of them, including linoformans, including semilanceata and strictipes, have a separable gelatinous pellicle, which when you break the cap and break it apart, you can see this translucent skin. Okay, thank you. And this is what it looks like under the microscope. And this gelatinized layer is a predominant taxonomic feature. But these are kind of the minor features, and I'm going to show you some of the more major features here in a second. So at the Psilocybin State College near Olympia, Washington, where Jonathan and I went to school, this person is not looking for a contact lens. This is the Psilocybe mushroom stoop, as we know it. And it's characteristic. When you see a student do this, it's a call, to all other students to come help. The difficulty in the Northwest is because it was recently totally forested. We have wood chips on the ground, and then lawns are laid on top. So those of us who wanted to write habitat-specific field guides, where we'd say in the fields Psilocybe semilanceata grows, in wood chips Psilocybe cyanescens grows, it becomes very complicated because you could find wood-decomposing mushrooms like cyanescens, Ambiocystis, etc., growing in areas that have lawns. So it become very problematic. But these lawns are fantastic because of the wood chips underneath and the sprinkler systems that come on all the time. So it's a beautiful, beautiful environment encouraging psilocybin mushrooms to grow. So at the Evergreen State College, where I was doing my research, I could literally walk out of the laboratory building, and within 20 feet, no exaggeration, I could find 4 different species in the genus Psilocybe. And I know now that from the reports of my professor, who's a very straight individual, he has 5 or 6 species growing in his yard at home. And he asked me, where do they come from, Paul? And I said, geez, Mike, you have all these mushrooms laying around your office all the time. Where do you think they came from? So clearly they impregnated his clothes, and he went home and threw out his garbage or mowed his yard or tended his garden, and he spread his spore mass. So, humans are vehicles for spreading Psilocybe spores. Now, humans have a peculiar and an unfortunate characteristic. There's no other organism on this planet who creates greater debris trails in the environment than humans. We're devastators. We should be Homo sapien devastators or something, as our name, because we go through environments where we wreak havoc. But the psilocybin active mushrooms have developed a very quick and unique response. They hitchhike on the activities of humans. So the chipping of wood, the laying down of lawns, allow these species to predominate. So these mushrooms are growing now, sometimes to the exclusion of other species. So a species that is unique to Washington and Oregon and British Columbia is Psilocybe stuntzii, named after Daniel Stuntz. And I don't believe there's any reports in Europe. It's very similar in some ways morphologically to cyanescens. I don't think so, but just as a general morphology. And this is my professor's backyard, and it has an annulus, or a ring on the stem here, that turns bluish. A species unfortunately growing in the same habitat is a deadly poisonous species by the name of Galerana autumnalis. So in the Northwest, there was great concern for accurately showing people how to distinguish between psilocybes and galerinas. Galerinas produce rusty brown spores. Psilocybes produce purple-brown spores. And that is the first and primary significant feature that you need to know in trying to identify psilocybin mushrooms. All mushrooms in the genus Psilocybe produce purple-brown spores, like you saw earlier with the spore prints of Psilocybe cubensis on the hat and on the paper. Galerinas produce rusty brown spores. This is a ring of death, is what I call it. Enough galerinas to probably kill a dozen people, with the late Stephen Pollock here in front of it. And so there's major concerns because I took this photograph, and here's Psilocybe stintzii growing side by side with with Galerana autumnalis, so close that the mushrooms are touching each other. And we put out the warning in the 1970s, and there was actually physicians discouraging information, and mycologists discouraging the spread of accurate information identifying psilocybin mushrooms because they were prejudiced against the people who were collecting them. And it was a violation, frankly, of their medical code to discourage people with to how to accurately identify these mushrooms. So several books, including my own, warned people about that, but unfortunately several people have died in North America from mistakenly eating the galerinas. Okay, so I'm going to finish up here in about 5 minutes, if I can. This is one of the species that I published with Dr. Gaston Guzman, and it's called Psilocybe cyanofibulosa. And it grows site-specifically underneath rhododendrons. So if you come to Washington or Oregon or British Columbia and you want to find psilocybe mushrooms, go to a rhododendron garden. It's the easiest place to find them. Rhododendron gardens use lots of wood chips. They use cardboard to suppress weeds. They tend to be lots of shade, multiple canopies, perfect environments for encouraging psilocybe mushrooms to grow. And Psilocybe cyanofibulosa is named because blue hairs on the stem, and the blue hairs turn slightly blue. They're bruised bluish. And the cap can expand to fully plane, and it's non-undulate, very different than cyanescens. And the bruising here. And it has bifurcate, or a splitting chylocystidia, which is a microscopic feature on the gills, which distinguishes this species from a whole group of other psilocybe species that look generally similar. And then this is the second and most significant feature, and most all of you are aware of this, is that mushrooms which contain high amounts of psilocin, or psilocin, however you want to pronounce it, bruise bluish. So the combination of having a purple-brown spore print and the fact that mushroom bruises bluish, those two conditions met, without a doubt, you have entered into an arena of psilocybin active species. There's some blue-ring stropharias, which are not poisonous and are questionably psilocybin active or somewhat similar, but 98% of the species that are psilocybin active, that are potent, that produce psilocin, have this bluing reaction. So if you pick a mushroom that has purple-brown spore print and it bruises bluish, then try it, eat it. It's not going to be a poisonous mushroom. It'll be a psilocybin active mushroom probably. This is Psilocybe biocystis, which is a very rare and hard to find species in Washington, and it blends in with the background, and it's also very, very potent. And there's lots of stories associated with this that I don't have time to get into. Another example of Psilocybe biocystis. And one of the more exciting mushrooms, which we have here in Europe, is Psilocybe cyanescens, and this is one of my favorite mushrooms to eat. And it has an undulating margin that's like a sine wave for you mathematicians out there. And it's something that is very, very easy to identify. And for my own sacred mushroom patches, I like to build shrines. Many of us do. And this is my mushroom shrine. And this Psilocybe cyanescens growing at the base of it. And I don't, grow many psilocybes. I don't need to. I mean, I don't even need to possess them. I can go out into the wilderness or into the cities and find them. So, I mean, there's like no reason for me to even grow them anymore because they're so easy for me to find. Now, there's a peculiar circumstance that if you're in the city and you can't find a rhododendron garden, where do you go in September and October and November in the state of Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia? You go to police stations, government office buildings, hospitals. John Allen is here in the audience, and he probably has accumulated more hours of collecting psilocybe mushrooms in urban environments than anybody in this planet. And it's amazing. When you don't trek out into the wilderness to find psilocybes. If you're in Washington and Oregon, you look for mountains of wood chips being used for landscaping, which typically is funded by the U.S. government. So the U.S. government is actively involved in promoting habitats growing psilocybe mushrooms all the time. And this also is a problem because in the state of Washington, where I live, near Olympia, the biggest psilocybe cyanescens patch I've ever seen is around the Thurston County Courthouse and jail. And I think it's there by no mistake, because they prosecuted people for collecting these mushrooms, and they bring them into the courthouse system. They will concentrate all these individuals carrying spore mass into the courthouse, and as a result spread spores all around that environment. So I think that prosecuting people for psilocybin mushrooms is antithetical to the very biology and the way that these mushrooms work. By the mere act of trying to prosecute individuals, you cultivate them. And I think... So, Christian, kind of 5 more minutes, right? 5 more minutes, right? Okay. Okay, this is a photograph of Christian 2 years ago, and this is the third species that I published with Dr. Gartz, who's here in the audience. And this is where the native habitat for psilocybe azurescens is. It's literally at the junction of the Columbia River, which is a mammoth river, one of the largest rivers in North America, as it joins into the Pacific Ocean. At the cusp of the Columbia River meeting the Pacific Ocean, there's these sand dunes and spits of land that go out into the ocean. At that very junction, where there's massive amounts of wind and tremendous devastation from the environment, this mushroom grows in profusion, almost to the exclusion of other species. And it is known as psilocybe azurescens. And it's called azurescens because the mushrooms, you blow on them, they turn blue. They're so potent. They have fibrils on the stem that just emanate this glowing azure color. And then the mushrooms are also notably quite large. And this mushroom here, I think, dried down to about 5 grams. So for you QB cultivators out there, you know what that means. And it also has a very strong hygrophanous cap and has rhizomorphs at the base of the stem. Now, in my next book, all of you growing Psilocybe cubensis, Psilocybe azurescens, Psilocybe cyanescens, this is stuff I can't talk about in the United States, you can cut the base of the stem here from the and get bundles of rhizomorphs, sandwich it in cardboard, and all these stem butts regrow as spawn. You don't have to buy spawn or spores or anything from anybody else. Once you get the mushrooms, and try this, it's fantastically easy. You just cut the base of the stem with the rhizomorphs here, wet corrugated cardboard, separate it, put the stem butts, lay it into the cardboard, laminate it over it, spray it, several times a week, and all the stem butts regrow into spawn, and you end up with a huge amount of mycelium. Then they can relaunch out into the environment. It's a coup d'etat technique that I think will revolutionize. And we all have too much cardboard around. Psilocybe azurescens is one of the most beautiful mushrooms. This is one of my better photographs of it. And it's a mushroom that I feel a strong bond with. It is no mushroom to play with. It is extremely potent. And as all of these entheogens, we all need to respect them, and sometimes you can only respect them by doing too much, and then you really know what you're dealing with. So, but it's a very, very potent species, far more potent than other ones. And it's very beautiful. We call it the flying saucer mushroom. It tends to be umbonate. It has an even cap margin, not undulating. And it's very easy to grow, like cyanescens, but about twice the kick, twice the potency. And they can be, as you can see, relatively large, and they bruise so dark blue they can become indigo black. They're that high in psilocin. Psilocybin dephosphorylates into psilocin, and when you adjust the mushrooms, you're getting off on psilocin, not psilocybin. So psilocin, presence of the bluing reaction, is an indicator probably of a co-degradation pathway of a compound yet unknown, which has a blue pigment. But it's a direct correlation for how potent the mushrooms once were. And then another mushroom that we have in the Northwest is very common in the ancient old growth and along trails is Psilocybe folliculosa. The sister species, Psilocybe sylvatica. Psilocybe folliculosa can grow right beside Galeron autumnalis, also a deadly poisonous species. And then the last species that I've published to date, I named after Dr. Andrew Weil, who's a naturopathic physician in the United States, some well-known. And this mushroom grows at these interface environments. Many of these do, between grasslands and shrubs. And this is now named and published as Psilocybe weilii, after Andrew Weil. And it grows in northern Georgia, which is the center of conservatism in North America. So right in the middle of the most conservative Baptist community, this mushroom comes up. I think it's like, it knows, right? And so I was very thankful when I saw this came out last week. This is an article by Norderloos, which re-examined the type collections of some of the major psilocybin active species. And in this mycological journal, he used the photographs in my most recent book, Psilocybin Mushrooms of the World, as icon photographs representative of the species concept. So I'm very thankful and very delighted that the taxonomy that I have proposed in my book has held the test of time, and now it's been selected out by other mycologists as true examples of the epitome of what the species concept should look like. And so I just want to close. This is our homepage for people who haven't surfed into it. And this came to me when I was driving down the highway and smoked a joint and listening to the Grateful Dead Terrapin Station, one of my favorite Grateful Dead songs. And it came to me, now, what is this about mushroom mycelium? Because when lightning strikes, mushrooms come up. The mycelium is rhizomorphic. It resembles neurons. And now there has been a report of a meteorite that came from Mars that was found in the Arctics, where mushroom-like mycelial structures have actually been identified. And I believe that this simple replication, this linear replication of cells, is a successful model that is being repeated throughout the universe. Terence McKenna was one of the first people to propose that mushrooms may have come from outer space. And the more that I studied this subject, I think he's right. I think that these forms are self-replicating. Nature builds upon successful models, and I think that these mushrooms, and even psilocybin mushrooms, may indeed be in the future common throughout the universe. Thank you very much.
Hello? We have no more. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much, Paul. This was a very nice journey into the neural system of Gaia. And hopefully it will fructify in your brains somewhere. Before we have a few minutes for questions, I have to make a little correction. You miscredited me for organizing this conference with Claudia. I have nothing to do with it. I'm just a guest. And this was totally done by Claudia, Hans, and Arno. So I just wanted you to know that. And then I gave you wrong information about tonight because we have not the room. So this artistic slideshow will be on Sunday. And then I have a very important announcement. And maybe some of you already know that the surprise guest will be here. And that is Albert Hoffman. And he will even talk to you, but only if you don't party too hard this night. He will be on sharp 9:30 tomorrow morning. No other chance to see him. And now we have already a line of people for questions. We pretty late. There's 3 people in line on the microphone, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to ask 3 questions in total.
Thank you, Paul, for that talk. That was fascinating. My question is, regarding the Liberty capsized mushrooms, can they be confused with anything that is deadly poisonous?
I can only speak from my experiences in Washington State and Oregon, but there is a species of Galerina in the Galerina venenata complex, which is deadly poisonous. And unfortunately, a 16-year-old girl died about 10 years ago. She was out picking Liberty caps and ingested some of these Galerinas as well. And because of the fear of going to the hospital, and the physicians, it was well known at some hospitals, were hand in hand with law enforcement, as then when these kids would come into the hospitals, they would also have mushrooms and they would bust them. And because it's well known throughout our community that going to the hospital is the worst thing that you can do, she avoided going to the hospital and she ended up dying. And she's one of there's only been 2 or 3 cases that I know of where that has occurred. So here in Europe, I know you have Galerina species in the genus Galerina, but I'm not familiar with the taxa of Europe well enough in the genus Galerina. But you should always be careful. You should know what you're taking. If you take a spore print, it's purple-brown in the genus Psilocybe, it's rusty-brown in the genus Galerina, and there are no poisonous mushrooms that are purple-brown that bruise bluish. There are some mushrooms that are maybe not active, not toxic.
My name is Nate, and I'm from Seattle, Washington State. And first off, I would just like to briefly thank you for spreading this good information, Paul. Thank you very much. And also, my question is in regards to gathering mushrooms outdoors in the springtime, and when the best time for that is, whether it's one day after a rainstorm, and whether or not it's affected by frost in Washington State.
In the fall time, frost actually stimulates Psilocybe azurescens to grow, and that is one of the things that we look forward to since it fruits late in the year. In the springtime, typically it's not after it's well after the first frost, but the springtime, the easiest mushroom to find is Pinella subalteatus, and that is one of the best species to find in horse paddocks. And that mushroom, no matter where you are in the world, you go into horse paddocks, you're going to find species in the genus Pinellus which will be active. So Pinella subalteatus is the easiest mushroom to find in the springtime.
And which months would those be?
May through July. You know, it depends on it. Because the compost heats up, it's hard to say. But anybody who makes compost piles, you know, you're driving by, you see compost piles of manure, wood chips, stop. You know, it's a good look at time. Yes, John.
Yeah, hey, Paul. I enjoyed your talk there. I just wanted to mention that worldwide there's 214 neurotropic species of fungi, of which now 170 have been identified as psilocybin. It'll be in a forthcoming paper by Guzman, me, and Johan Gartz. 170? Yeah, 170.
Great. Hey, the more the better. And I just want to clarify, of course, Arno and Hans, I very much acknowledge and appreciate your help, but I also have a personal mention of gratitude, because we had a flurry of communications via fax and email, which didn't always meet. So, Claudia, thank you for your super effort in getting us here.
Okay, thank you. I think we had a very nice day, a lot of new information, and I was very surprised that all of the speakers came up with something new, unpublished. And for your information, next year, the yearbook number 7, the yearbook for ethnomedicine and the study of consciousness, will publish all the papers of this conference. That will be available maybe in spring next year. So I wish you a very pleasant night and have beautiful dreams and curing sleeps. See you tomorrow. Huh?
Good evening.
Before everybody leaves, I would like to say that...
Me too. I also would like...
Greetings. It's an honor to be here. I would like to dedicate this talk to my good friend Christian and Claudia. They've made a tremendous effort to put this conference together. So thank you, Christian and Claudia. I've also had quite a number of experiences with Amanita muscaria as well as Pantherina, and at later times I definitely want to talk to Ralph and other people about that. But this talk is going to center on the psilocybin active species. And because there are literally over 200 species that have been described in the genus Psilocybe to date, of which we now know over 100 of them are psilocybin active, I can't possibly show all the species that I would love to show you in the course of 45 minutes. I will try to speak slowly. It is not my nature, nor was it Jonathan's nature, but he did a very good job at slowing down. So I'm going to progress immediately to the first slides. If we could have the lights down. This is a photograph that was given to me by Peter First, and it's pottery from southern Mexico that is approximately 500 years AD, and I think it symbolizes what we're all about. We're at a gathering celebrating the beauty and wonderment of mushrooms, as well as other plants. And I think that these gatherings have progressed through millennia because of our common interest. Now, to give you some description, this photograph has never been shown in public. This is me when I was 19 years of age. And this is my first attempt at growing Psilocybe cubensis. And there's my pressure cooker there. And you can imagine the response that I got from very straight mycologists when I would walk into their laboratories at universities and say, I'm interested in mushrooms. You know, they would immediately stereotype me as to my particular interest, and they were quite right. But the psilocybin mushrooms have been my gateway into a larger arena of mushroom species, some of which I know now deeply will have a pivotal impact on helping us survive into the next millennium. There is a quote, and I don't know who first said it. I wish I did. But it says, "The greatest achievement of science this century, the acknowledgement of our ignorance." A few places left on the planet where the fungal genome is relatively undisturbed. And the ecological niches that are shrinking because of overpopulation, pollution, et cetera, we're losing an enormous number of potential candidates that have significant medicinal properties, as well as those that are psilocybin active. So this is where we live. We live right here in this facility. We have a 17-acre farm, and this is on Skookum Inlet. And it's at the very southern reaches of the Puget Sound. And this is our research facility, and it's 17 acres, 400 feet of waterfront, and we have two state-of-the-art laboratories in vitro, wherein we do in vitro propagation. We have 3 growing rooms where we test different strains, etc. Now, in 1980, I started a business called Fungi Perfecti. And my business today, I'm sure, would be very affluent. I'd be a very wealthy person had I chosen to sell spore prints of psilocybin mushrooms. I chose not to. The situation in the United States is quite different than here. And the authorities there watched very carefully to see, literally every time that we stopped the car and opened the doors, we were finding psilocybes everywhere. It wasn't like we were going after psilocybes were coming to us. And I see that again and again. Those of you who have been mushroomed, we are selected, I feel, by the mushrooms. We become communicators or vehicles of knowledge. We don't own this information, and I don't think that any of the speakers pretend that we even have any copyright to that knowledge. The mushrooms come to us. They impassion us. They excite us, and through that excitement and research, etc., we recommunicate larger and greater ideas than our own minds can create. So, my partner and I, Dusty, we live a few miles from here. We live at the base of the Olympic Peninsula, of the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State, which is in the far west coast region of North America. And we do a lot of this. Dusty is an incredible hiker, and oftentimes I'm trailing, 50 to 100 feet behind her, trying to catch up. And we go into the old growth forest in search of new taxa, in search of new mushroom species. And we see that the old growth forests are one of the, and I feel that very deeply. I come before you and I want to be very clear, I know almost nothing about mushrooms. The more I study them, the more I realize the depth of knowledge that is soon or yet to be discovered. And this is also true. It takes many minds and many people's experiences to bring knowledge together. And I think we've tapped into a body of knowledge heretofore unexplored, even to as minutest level. And I think we're entering into a new age of awareness that is a whole new frontier with fantastic possibilities. So in 1976, and I see this conference as a continuation of that, Jonathan Ott and a number of other individuals started the first conference on psychoactive mushrooms. And it was held in Washington State at a place called Miller-Sylvania State Park. Directly after that conference, myself and Dr. Gaston Guzman, Gary Menser, now deceased, Stephen Pollack, also now deceased, and Stephen was one who first described Psilocybe tamponensis. Myself and Dale Leslie went on a wild mushroom gathering experience that lasted well over 2 weeks. And we were gathering specimens for Dr. Gaston Guzman's monograph on the genus Psilocybe, and he is the world's expert on that genus. And in the course of this travel,